I'm Julia Johnson, reporting for the Washington Examiner, and I'm joined today by Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina. Thank you for joining me today, Representative Mace.
And thank you for having me.
So let's start with, you recently told FBI Director Christopher Wray to man up and do his job. This was after the FBI had refused to provide a document that the Oversight Committee subpoenaed it for, saying that they didn't want to release unverified or incomplete information. It was going to compromise the way that they do their investigations.
Which is total I mean, let's be honest. Yeah.
Do you believe that they're purposefully at the FBI avoiding a larger investigation into the Biden family?
100%. I do believe that the FBI is trying to stonewall the Oversight Committee in our investigation, and if they won't do their job, then we'll do their job for them. And we will get documents that we need. We will show and share them with the American public. We'll look at more suspicious activity reports. We'll get more bank records, even if they want to keep them hidden from the American people, because they ought to know that Joe Biden's seat was for sale, that China bought it, Russia bought it, Romania bought it. Dozens of countries around the world got access to the president because of his family, and they were paid off millions and millions of dollars. And if the American people could see what we've seen, they would question why this administration isn't investigating the Biden family. And if it's legal, it sure as hell shouldn't be legal, in my opinion. But if it were, it's certainly not something that should be. And it's disgusting and it's un-American.
Now, the House Oversight Committee, which you're on, led by James Comer, had a press conference last week, and you revealed that there was a web of companies and LLCs that are connected to the Biden family and their business associates, a lot of them after he became vice president. The New York
and some during his vice presidency. So,
the New York Times then said, House Republicans report find no evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden. What is your response to the New York Times?
Well, the media wants to ignore the evidence. We were literally showing bank records and shell companies and tens of millions of dollars being shuffled around. We know that Hunter Biden paid Joe Biden's bills. We know that there was 10% siphoned off for the, quote, big guy, according to emails and text messages from the laptop, which we were told we were conspiracy theorists. Turns out we were right in that. And when you look at the White House records and the revolving door that Hunter Biden's clients were with, then Vice President Biden and President Biden. You look at the flight logs and you see the flights that Hunter Biden was on to some of these countries. If you look at Burisma in Ukraine and the corruption that we've seen in places like Romania and how they're tied to the Biden family, you had up to nine Biden family members, a brother, a son, a grandchild, nieces and nephews, current wives, ex-wives. None of them were foreign agents. What was the seed money for? They said it was for seed money, but what was that for? There was no business plan. And clearly they were just paying for access that they couldn't otherwise get. Joe Biden literally sold his country.
Now, the White House counsel ahead of the press conference preemptively said this is a political investigation. Is there any truth to that? Is this at all a political investigation?
Well, no one can say that I'm in the tank for Donald Trump or anybody else. Like, that's not what this is about. I call the balls and strikes. I talk out against Republicans as much as I talk out against Democrats when I see BS happening up here in Washington. And when I saw, what really set me off was seeing the suspicious activity reports and what that meant. The wire fraud, the money laundering, racketeering, and RICO comes to mind when you look at some of these documents. I literally saw pages this thick, page after page after page, about an alleged prostitution ring with Russian hookers. This is not millions of dollars spent on that. I'm not making any of this up. And then when you look at, again, the access to the White House, the access to the flights that the vice president took at the time, and president, the LLCs that were created when he was vice president, how they cashed in after he was vice president, all of those things are not shouldn't be supported by the American people, and they don't support it. And over 60% of American people, regardless of their political affiliation, want this investigated. And I think that if we just follow the facts, then that should be fair and honest and transparent. If it means that we refer charges to DOJ, then so be it. If it also means that no law was broken and we don't refer charges, then at the end of the day, that information will also be shared. But this isn't something you can ignore. You just can't.
Now, also last week, Title 42 ended. And the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, he went on CNN yesterday, and he said that encounters were down 50%, and that they've been preparing for this for months, really assuring the public that they've got it under control.
Yeah, funny when you say that it's down 50% when you've had over 6 million illegal immigrants cross the southern border illegally since Joe Biden became president. I mean, that's just a lie. I mean, flat out, the numbers don't lie.
Yeah. So should Americans be comforted at all by this Mayorkas statistic?
No, because Mayorkas doesn't know what he's talking about. And he's gone down to the border to call our Border Patrol agents racist and deny that there was ever a border issue. And clearly there is. And clearly it's not being addressed. And the administration has had 2 years to address the influx of immigration. Just because it's down 50% after a day down there with extra security, it's clearly higher than it's ever been in the history of the United States. We got over 10,000 people a day crossing our southern border illegally, and the number of people that cross illegally from the northern border, less than 10,000 a year. And so it's just, when you look at the math on this and you see the destruction it's doing in our border cities, but also every state has now become a border state. Every state has MS-13 gangs. Every state has fentanyl overdoses. Every state has law enforcement that are getting exposed to fentanyl and drug busts. People are dying. And there's human trafficking and sex trafficking. My hometown of Goose Creek, just 3 years ago, there was a huge human trafficking bust. 28 people arrested in the small town of Goose Creek, South Carolina. We had an MS-13 gang member in Beaufort, South Carolina, arrested 2 years ago. These aren't major metropolitan cities where we know the issue is even worse. This is small town America. The breadwinner, the bellwether of our country, and this stuff is there. It's here, and it's not going away with the policies of an open border. And if you have an open border, you don't really have a country. We should follow the laws in our nation. Every other country around the world has borders, and they try to keep them secure, but not us.
Now, it sounds like you don't believe Mayorkas when he says they're prepared for this. Would that be fair?
No, not at all. I mean, he's just full of it.
None of your Democratic colleagues voted for the GOP border package, and it's considered dead on arrival when it gets to the Senate. Is there any practical or an effective border policy that can be passed that would get support of some Democrats and Republicans?
I think if we reform the visa program that we have today, if you address the H-2B visas and H-1B visas, and you just did it H-2Bs as a solo bill, H-1B visas as a solo bill. If we could do up or down votes on bills that would allow people to come here to work for a temporary amount of time and then go back home, that is something that I believe that both sides of the aisle can agree. But the problem is one side is going to want a wall. I want a wall too, but that should be a separate bill. The other side's going to want to address DACA, something that should be addressed. But when you start doing these massive immigration bills, everyone loses because nothing happens. And so I think if we could initially address the visa issue, like my district in my state, whether you're rural and farmland, or maybe you're in a bigger city where you rely on tourism, that visa program would allow people to come here and work and then go back home. We should also look at taking some of our manufacturing out of China and incentivizing manufacturers to go to Mexico, go to Central America, go to South America, be closer to here, and make those countries south of our border more prosperous economically, so people won't feel the need to leave their countries and flee to the United States to find a good job and find peace. They can find peace and prosperity in their own countries. And so there are a couple of different ways that we can bring some attention to it.
Have you brought up that concern of maybe doing things more incrementally to leadership?
I bring up issues all the time in different groups I'm a part of, including our conference. But sometimes ideas, there's 435 of us total in the conference, 222 Republicans. It's hard to get consensus even in your own party.
Now, one of the big issues for you right now is abortion. Mm-hmm. And that's also emerging as a big issue for 2024 prospective candidates. Mm-hmm. You describe yourself as pro-life, but you often face some criticism from your own side, accusing you of not being pro-life. Mm-hmm. You want a middle ground, and that's been heard a little bit. Nikki Haley, who's running for president recently, said that she wants a federal consensus. Do you think that abortion policy is going to shape the 2024 race? Well,
it shaped 2022 races, and I do believe that if Republicans, if they ignore it, that it will also affect our races in 24. And it's interesting because I mostly talk about exceptions for rape, for incest, for life of the mother. I talk about women's access to birth control. I talk about adoption services. And that's too radical for some people on the far right. Republicans up here don't want to vote to give women better access to birth control. And you have to ask yourself, what the is wrong with you? If you want to reduce the number of abortions in this country, then you also need to increase the number of women who can have access to birth control, safe access to birth control, because we have entire counties in this country that don't have a single OBGYN doctor. And if you want to get serious about saving lives, then let's get serious about saving lives and also showing that you can be pro-life and you can be pro-woman at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And to be afraid to talk about rape in this country when millions of women have gone through that, when there are hundreds of thousands of rape kits sitting on shelves that haven't been processed yet, and we can't get convictions on those crimes because they haven't been processed, it's pretty much like being an asshole to women. And we can't do that. If you want to win over suburban moms, show compassion. And what I'm trying to do is show a roadmap and show that middle ground. And it really wasn't that long ago that my ideas were mainstream in the Republican Party. Just 2 years ago, pro-life groups embraced a bill that was a 20-week bill with exceptions for rape and incest. But since Roe was overturned, they've moved the goalposts, and they're celebrating bans that don't have exceptions. They don't want to talk about birth control. If you talk about birth control, they won't work with you. I know this firsthand because that's what's been going on in our office. Because we're talking about birth control measures, some of these pro-life groups will not work with us. And it's disgusting. And what I want to show is that as a conservative living in a very purple district, this is the roadmap to winning in states and in districts where independents outnumber Republicans, or where Democrats and independents outnumber Republicans, where we can win over suburban women and suburban moms. There's a path to doing that, but you gotta take positions and be vocal about them and show that you care.
Now, are there other issues you feel similarly that you could have a better 2024 strategy?
Violence. I think gun violence is a huge issue. If you're a suburban mom and you're dropping your kids off at school, you worry every single day, is my kid's school going to be the next mass shooting? Or my church, or my synagogue, or the Planned Pregnancy Center that I volunteer at? Is this going to be the next one? And because I say gun violence is bad, people automatically think I'm saying gun control. It's almost like gun violence is a four-letter word, but we need not be afraid. There are things that we can do, like a mass or active shooter alert when there is a mass shooting, to allow people in a half-mile radius of the shooting to know to take cover, maybe not leave your building or your home or your work if that's happening, to give people a warning. There are things we can do to strengthen background checks that have nothing to do with taking away the guns of law-abiding citizens. Hardening our schools and synagogues and churches with leftover COVID funds. There are so many things that we can do where we can show a middle ground that the vast majority of Americans support. So does the left, so does the right. And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about sensitive issues or controversial issues if we have policies and ideas and plans in place that keep communities safe. Why is it so difficult to have a conversation? And then if I say gun violence, I'm attacked for saying gun violence. It's happening. In fact, there was a mass shooting. We've had multiple mass shootings in my district this year. In fact, just a few weeks ago, my kids and I were a mile down the road from a shooting where 6 people were shot. 6 people. And my kids turned to me. The first thing they said to me was, "Hey, Mommy, where's the Amber Alert to tell us we're near a shooting and to not go outside?" I'm out of the mouths of babes. The kids have so much common sense.
Now, continuing on 2024, you have a relationship with Nikki Haley, as we mentioned, but there's also another South Carolinian who might be entering the race in Tim Scott. You haven't made an endorsement yet, but are you considering making an endorsement in the primary? And
my campaign manager is now Trump's state director and lives in the district too.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's all sorts of this trifecta thing that's going on right now. I will tell you, I've said I'm going to watch the race and see how it settles and see who's going to actually be in the race and who's not. I have said for a long time that I want to see a woman on the ticket. I greatly admire Nikki Haley. She endorsed me. She was the only one to endorse me last year in my race where Donald Trump handpicked someone to run against me, and we won. We were the only House Republican to win a race against Donald Trump last year. And so I have great admiration and respect for her for sticking her neck out. And so I am watching closely. I would love to see a South Carolinian on the ticket. Would certainly love for it to be a woman. It's past time we had a woman president, and I would love for her to be conservative.
Now, you did mention Trump tried to sort of oust you from your seat. And you've been critical of him in the past, but you've also been supportive of some of the things he's done.
Yeah.
Would you support him if he was the nominee?
I've said I'll support the nominee when we get through the process, and I hope that it's a vigorous process right now. I've largely, by and large, supported his policies over the years, and that's never changed. But the politics of personality sometimes, is unnecessary. We are fighting enough to save our country. We don't need to fight each other. And many of us take up different issues that are important to our states and our district and our nation. And we should be encouraging that. We should want every Republican to be successful, which means not just winning a primary and then losing a general. We should want to win primaries and win general elections, which means in bellwether districts and bellwether states, you have to appeal to beyond the Republican Party. You have to appeal to independents and moderates and centrists, and even maybe people who are left of center. And I've shown a path and a way to do that as a conservative, being able to bring people over. We have more independents than Republicans by double digits in our district. And Democrats and independents outnumber Republicans 2-1. I'm a conservative sitting in this seat, and I've shown that there is a path to winning in purple districts. And we've done it, and here's how.
Now, we're fast approaching the June 1st deadline to raise the debt ceiling. Biden met with Kevin McCarthy and others last week, and they didn't come out with much, but they're going to meet again this week. Is default a real possibility?
It's not, and in fact, that is just a fear tactic by the left and by the mainstream media. In terms of tax revenues, we get 11 times the interest on the debt. So there's no reason to default. Now, it would mean that we would have to prioritize our spending, obviously putting the interest on the debt first, and no one wants to cut veterans' benefits or Social Security. None of that has to happen. But the president can prioritize spending and ensure that we don't default. We only default if the president wants us to.
And what can Congress do to escape this constant battle of raising the debt ceiling?
Congress can stop spending money we don't have. And quite frankly, it's been both sides. We have $32 trillion in debt and counting because the right and the left, Republicans and Democrats, made it happen. It wouldn't happen without both sides making sure that they're adding to the debt. If you look at President Trump, he added $8 trillion to the debt. President Biden has added $4 trillion in the first 2 years of his presidency. All told, that is $12 trillion just over the last 6 years. And so you can't blame just Democrats, you can't blame just Republicans, you gotta blame them both. And in fact, it was a Democrat president who was the last president to balance the budget. That was Bill Clinton in 1998, because House Republicans had a plan to balance the budget over a decade. And they did it in 4 years, so they ended up with a cash surplus and tax revenue, and were able to do that. So we have precedent in this country. We've had a Democrat president and a Republican-controlled House where they've worked together to make sure that we don't go off the fiscal cliff. In the 2010 to 2012 era, we had cut, cap, and balance. We used sequesters. We have used different tools along the way to keep ourselves in check. But for the last decade, neither Republicans or Democrats have kept each other accountable. And look where it's gotten us. I mean, it's a horrible place for our future. You look at our weakness around the world with a weaker dollar and our vulnerabilities. It's made us enormously vulnerable.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Representative Mace. I'm Julia Johnson, and you can find more exclusive interviews at washingtonexaminer.com.